good evening. Thank you so much for being here and spending part of your evening with us. We feel like Smart Families is something that you all need to know a little bit more about. We needed to know a little bit more about it, and we're excited to be able to come together and learn about this tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Father, because we'll begin like we do all things with a special prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Let's just take a moment to recollect ourselves and place ourselves in the presence of God. Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here this evening. We thank you for the blessing of our children, the blessing of your children, whom you have entrusted to us. Please fill us with your Spirit. Help us to be receptive to what you want to teach us tonight, that we may be better educators, better parents, better formators of our children. May we welcome into our home your holy presence, that you may claim it for yourself, that we may belong to you, Lord. Mary, Mother of the Holy Family, please cover us in your mantle and grant that we may experience the joy, peace, and unity to be found in your Son, Jesus Christ. Ask this as we pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Saint Francis of Assisi, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It is my pleasure to pass it off to Mr. Vineyard, who will tell us more about our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Father. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Kyle Vineyard, and I work for Smart Families, but I'm also honored to be a parishioner here. My boys, you might know them from their antics in class. So we've got a second grader, Ezra, and a kindergartner, Henry. But it's really just an honor to be able to see my professional life overlap with my faith and with my family. And I'm really, really happy with the turnout that we've had here tonight. And a lot of that, I have to give the credit to Faye and to Mary for just being those people that wanted Smart Families in their school and had the foresight to think about, to think about how this program could help our community here. So Smart Families, we're a nonprofit. We work with schools, we work with teachers, principals, and parents, and the students themselves, really just to educate them about what's going on in tech and in the world today, and how these things are affecting the plan that God had for all of us, the way in which He wished for us to develop and to grow. And when we allow these things to come into our lives and distract from our faith and from our family, that's something that I think we should all take offense to. And so I'm really proud to work here, and I'm really proud to be here tonight. So thank you all. Now, you're about to hear from Dr. Jody Hunt. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Neuhoff Institute for Evangelization and Ministry. She has a PhD and has worked at the University of Dallas for over 5 years as an affiliate assistant professor of ministry and theology. Her research interests include digital theology, practical theology, religious education, and youth ministry, with a specific focus on American Catholicism and its complex relationship with the digital world. So without further ado, Dr. Hunt. Oh, and if you did not grab a raffle ticket or a free Jeans Day pass when you came in, please do so on the way out, or you can come and see me.
Hear me okay? Is this working okay? Okay. Sometimes you have to place it weird to get it to work. Well, thank you for being here this evening. I'm a Catholic mom too, and I have 3 at home. I have an 8-year-old, as of this past Sunday, so an 8-year-old. I have an 11-year-old and I have a 14-year-old. So I'm very much in the trenches along with you in terms of digital technology. I've seen the fits, I've seen the crying. I've done, digital detox with my kids because I think they had too much screen time. My oldest just got his first cell phone because he went to high school, and so we're navigating that side of things with him. And so there's no place of judgment whatsoever when I talk about these type of things. If there's anything I could hope I could do, if I don't teach you anything new, my goal is to affirm that what you're doing in your family and the boundaries you're setting is the right path for your family. And I'm going to give you a lot of reasons why to stay the course and to set these boundaries when it comes to digital technology. And so, like you said, like Kyle said, we're part of Smart Families, and I've been so honored to be asked to present for Smart Families and be a part of this organization in this way, because there's just a wonderful group of people who really think through about how we can shape the culture by making our small changes in our families when it comes to smartphones and smart devices. So Smart Families is dedicated to empowering families to create communities that engage with technology in a healthy, intentional way that's respectful of our unique human dignity. And there's a really big emphasis on human dignity. Smart devices, in a lot of ways, has changed our culture view of the human person. When we go onto our devices, it's a natural tendency for us to kind of forget we are human in those spaces. And so we think about how to be intentional. Smart Families is not anti-technology. We encourage technology. We use technology. I use technology. Anything from like AI over to your basic algorithms and things like that as we do different marketing, whatever it is. Our kids use technology in our homes, right? I mean, that's just part of life, today's American home. But we want to be intentional with it, that when we go into these digital spaces that we're thinking about what we're doing, and our kids and you understand what's being done toward you and how your brain, and we're going to focus on this, how the brain receives information and processes information, and the importance of setting boundaries, because when you don't set boundaries, their young brains aren't really developed enough to be able to process all the information that's been pounding toward their brains at any given time when they're scrolling and things like that. So that's what we're kind of looking at. I start here because this is a really great quote from Pope Francis. He actually said this at just a basic catechetical Sunday type event, not from a major document, but I think it's quite profound. He says, "We are living in a new world that when we were young, we could hardly imagine. We are living in a new world that when we were young, we could hardly imagine." And he said this to a group of young people, and they were just talking about what the world may look like when they become older. And he says, and I think that's really important because when you think about when you were young, the world looked very different. Some of you I can tell are older than me or younger than me, everything in between. But when I was younger, my life was really simple. This is me when I was young in 1980s. I was born in 1981, so most of my childhood was non-digital. There was nothing. It wasn't until I went to college. I was telling someone earlier this week, I was like, yeah, I was in college before I had a laptop, and the look on his face was just like, I can't believe you didn't have a computer. And I was like, yeah, we had a computer in the home when I was in high school, but it was in my parents' bedroom, and it was mostly for my mom to use because she was a school teacher and needed to type things out. I didn't have access to anything like that. But this is what I was doing outside. We raised sheep. That was my first Suffolk lamb, Minnie May, and now my kids raise Suffolk, and we have South Downs, and we're outside. The sun is up, they're outside. We were outside last night working sheep and feeding and doing different types of things. We were always outside when I was growing up because we were not addicted or attached to the scrolling device because there was nothing such thing in my brain. That idea that one day I would have this digital device, that my kids would have this in their hand, I never even thought about that. Our first TV was the big box TV. That was huge, and there was no remote control. So there was no scrolling through the channels. You had to actually walk up and walk across the room, and someone had to be the remote control. And you would sit there, and Mom would say, it was a dial. Ours was a dial. It was like turn, turn, turn. Okay, stop. And then you would just keep turning until you found something. And if you missed it, you missed it. And I tell my kids that all the time when they get upset. When you're like, okay, you've had enough for the screen today. I tell my kids, I'm like, you can come back to this. You can even pause live TV. I was like, I don't know what in my day, When you missed it, you were hopeful that you came on as a rerun during the summer and you got to see what happened at the end of the episode. But then our life became this wild thing. In 2003, on the social media side, 2003 is when MySpace came and hit. And then really just about every 2 years, we had another social media platform come into space. And TikTok comes in 2016. TikTok's actually almost 10 years old. Even though in American culture, it really became big during the pandemic. And that's when all of our kids, because what else were we going to do but talk to each other through social media because we're in our homes. But it's been around a long time. And then you look at all the devices. This up here, the little storefront, that's actually the first Photoshop icon. That's what it looked like for me when I started looking at computers in school. In school, you may go to the computer lab like once a month, once every quarter. And it was like this little big clunky computer, like the IBM. And it was a green screen. And we'd either play Oregon Trail, or there was also a turtle game. And the turtle, I think it was math, and the turtle would eat things. But it was all green, and it had like this big flashing red, or greenish yellow thing, like a box. And that's where you typed at. And it was really cool when we finally got Photoshop. But if you look over here at Jobs, he has a little smart device. All these devices go right into that smartphone. Really, they're just mini computers, and they're super machines. Compared to where we came, that IBM machine, what we have in our palm of our hands, like a super machine, with all the apps, all the access to information, 24/7, and never turns off. People can call you, you can FaceTime, all the stuff. You can listen to music, you can do social media. And so that's what we're talking about. It's like, imagine your kids have these devices, a lot of things are coming at them, and their brains just are not ready to process that information and to really dive into that information just yet. And it has an impact on their brain and how we're forming and framing their brains. And I also bring in spirituality because I'm a whole person. My background's in theology. So it's not just their brain, not the intellectual, but also their heart. It's impacting their whole entire body when they're just mindlessly scrolling. So tonight we're going to kind of go through those type of things. This is just sort of a migration of what you can see about the phones. Remember, like the phone used to rotary dial? My grandparents had that type of phone. My phone was on the wall with the big long cord. I think I was in high school when we first got our cordless phone, and that was a really big deal. I was like in middle school when we actually got an answering machine in my family, and that was really cool because people could leave us messages, and we knew when to call back. And so we had all these different types of things. I also remember my dad's a police officer in Mesquite, Texas for over 30 years, and so there was a Radio Shack on his beat, and he always stopped in and talked to the guys there. And one day he came home and he had like this briefcase, and he told my mom, and I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "This is your car phone." And I was like, "What is that?" It's a car phone. You plug it into the lighter, and you just had it synced up to some satellite somewhere, and it was just in the suitcase thing. And he's like, "So if you ever get stuck on a highway, you have a phone. You have somewhere to call. You don't have to rely on the payphone or having money on you." Because before that, if my mom was out grocery shopping or doing whatever, she would give my sister and I a quarter or 50 cents, and she would say, "Go find a payphone." She would just be shopping in the store. She'd like, "Go outside and find a payphone and call your dad and ask him a question about dinner or whatever it was." And so now he's like, "Now you can just call me from the car." And that was like the first time phones were introduced into my family. And I still remember that because my mom was just looking at him like a world she could hardly imagine. She was like, "What are you talking about? A car phone." And that's what we called it. And then now we have this smart device that has become just so encompassing in our culture. Really extension of ourselves in a lot of ways. So tonight, as I kind of overread through, we're going to talk about child and adolescent brain behavior. We're going to look at the effects of smartphones. So I'll give you a lot of examples. And you know this. You probably are experiencing some of this, if not in your family and your community. But we'll talk about them and see how kids are being affected, kids and young adults up to teenage years. And also what you could do at the end. We kind of wrap it up about, as parents, you're like, "Oh, this is great, Dr. Hunt, great information, but what am I going to do? How am I going to correct? How am I going to set boundaries?" So we'll talk briefly about 3 easy ways you could do that and reset your family or keep your family on the right path as we move forward. So first, let's talk about brain function and brain development and executive functioning. We'll talk about executive functioning more specifically. Executive functioning is your reasoning. It's very simple. It's your reasoning skills, your critical thinking skills. Emotional intelligence, we've heard that term, how you regulate your emotions, how you can understand what's happening around you, the context of other emotions, you can just kind of sense what's going on. Executive functioning is like the intellectual side of that. It's like, how do you think ahead and understand consequences based on behavior? A good example of executive functioning that we start with is with Albert Einstein. And we start there to emphasize like where critical thinking is developed. So Albert Einstein, when he was about 5, 6 years old, he was kind of written off by his school teachers that he wasn't very smart. And the reason why they wrote him off is because he couldn't speak well. He had a stutter, he couldn't communicate, probably because his brain was working faster than his communication skills were. I mean, he's a bright guy. But because of his problems with speech, the teachers basically said, I'm sorry, he's just a dumb kid. That's what his sister said. He's like, yeah, they wrote him off as not being able to learn, be able to talk. But his parents didn't really give into that. They said, no, we think there's something there. We're going to continue to encourage it. So they would do small things to help his executive functioning, to help learn these reasoning skills and give him the space to let his brain just sort of absorb and learn and critically think. The first thing his sister often describes in his biography is that his dad, when Albert Einstein was really, really sick, her dad gave him a compass, just a small little compass to fidget and play with, just something to do while he was laying in bed sick. And he fell in love with this compass. She's like, then he would spend hours just looking at it and using it and twisting it and taking it apart, put it back together. And that was he forming that executive functioning. He was learning a new skill. He was learning like there's consequences to movement, and this action leads to this reaction and all those different types of things. And that's something so simple, but allow his brain to process and to think, and to also kind of anticipate results from doing certain things. The other thing that happened when his early childhood that really helped with his brain development is his mother gave him a musical instrument. And she was a pianist and a violinist, and she gave him a violin. She's like, here, just go play with this. And she just gave him the space to start picking on a violin. And he would spend hours just playing with it. And that, too, is that type of executive functioning. When you place the screen in front and you replace our screens in that, our smart devices, which is really any device you can scroll through or perform computer-like activities on. And I would include iPads on this because iPads more or less have become larger cell phones in a lot of ways. But any of those like free scrolling devices, you are really not engaging that executive functioning or that frontal lobe development. You're hindering it because you're not really deep, like in this really deep contemplation, understanding the consequences, reactions, and things like that. You're just kind of mindlessly glossing over types of things. The other side of this in early childhood, you also have spiritual formation. So there's a guy named James Fowler who has like the spiritual development of the child, and there's like 12 steps. But around age 5, 6 years old, right at that peak, right before you get to the age of reason, which we say is 7 in the Catholic Church, he says that there is mythic literal stage. And it basically means kids believe what they see. And they don't really question it. I mean, they may ask, like, who is God? But you tell them, and they just accept what it is. They just take it literally, and they say, yeah, that's satisfying to me. I accept that, right? They walk into these really great spaces. And you may see it when the kids walk into this church. They walk in, and they look at the stained glass, and it's like, wow, their eyes move upward, right? It's that mythic understanding, like something bigger than me is around here, and they have a sense of that. And when you place the screen within a child at that time, that like awe and wonder, that sense of awe and wonder is diminished because their brain is not given the space to process the sacred around them. And through that, what we started to see in sort of like the spiritual development, we used to see this rebellion stage in their teenage years where they began to start questioning these really, really deep questions and not taking things literal. Like they would say, who is God? You tell them who God is, like, well, I don't believe that, right? And so they began to disaffiliate in that teenage years. But now we're seeing kids as young as 8 to 10 years old it's almost like we're progressing them faster through that stage of awe and wonder and getting out of it. And a lot of that is probably because they're on smart devices. Like the proposal is they're just so inundated with information, they don't have the spiritual space to just be in the presence of spirituality, of these sacred spaces, because they're just scrolling. That's all they're doing is they're scrolling and their brains are taking this on. And those are really important. And those are skills, right? So Einstein and that mythic literal, even the spirituality skills, those are really, really important skills that your brains are developing throughout childhood, right? What happens if your brain doesn't use those skills? It loses it. So those executive functioning skills that you're teaching your toddlers, those executive functioning skills that you're teaching your young adults as they get closer to having that frontal lobe fully developed, those are being lost in favor of just these mindless scrolling, because people are not using those executives. They're not critically thinking or discerning. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's really, really important that we kind of think in those terms. So to kind of just really explain it also in terms of parents, so like your role and this executive functioning, from birth to 12 years old, you think of yourself as being sort of this construction worker. You're scaffolding your kids. You're teaching them these critical thinking skills. You're teaching them not to touch the boiling pot because it's hot. You're teaching them to slow down, to think, to contemplate. You're teaching them that if you do X, Y, and Z, these are the consequences. There's good and bad consequences to every action, right? You're teaching them, you're scaffolding them. And then around the mid-adult age, from 12 to 25 years old, you become more of a guardrail. And I can say this as a parent of a teenager, this is what I become, right? He doesn't need me to tell him all the consequences. He pretty much knows, like, if he doesn't turn his homework in, what those consequences are, right? He pretty much knows that if he doesn't wake up on time, what the consequence is, or if he doesn't do his chores. He knows these type of things have been taught to him. He knows the consequences of touching a boiling pot, right? These have been developed over time. He has critical thinking skills. But sometimes he needs guardrails to tell him, hey, you have these critical thinking skills, use your brain. And they tell him often, like, use your brain, just think a little bit harder about that. Because sometimes we just have to put those guides back in. So even when your kid, you think, okay, my kid gets to that 12 to 15, they can go into their smart device, right? They're old enough. And I would say, no, they're not. They still need you there as a guardrail to help them understand the consequences and to help be reminded of that scaffolding you did for them at their early age. And you have this, your frontal lobe is not fully developed until age 25. You guys know that? Do we have football fans in here? Yeah. Did your team win this weekend? Mine did, A&M. Yeah, it was really exciting. Let's not talk about that final call that was missed, but we won. So we won, right? But sometimes when we lose a lot in Aggieland. So when we lose, my coping mechanism is like, these are kids and their frontal lobe is not formed yet. They're making stupid mistakes because they're kids, right? We forget that in college football. These are real kids. And their frontal lobe isn't. So you can see age 5 up through adolescence, that brain is really active, processing information, taking it in. And then around 20 years old, 25, you begin to see that gray matter really settle down. That's because that frontal lobe is forming. Those critical skills are there, the executive functioning, the emotional intelligence, those skills you've been working so hard to teach your kids, to really for them to take it in and to absorb and to do, has taken shape and form. And that's why in adulthood, you have people who are going to reason. Now, as a side note, you may be thinking, well, okay, that's great, Dr. Hunt, but I know a guy who's 27 and he cannot think for the life of him through anything. And that's because we are human after all, right? We're human after all. And our brains are all wired differently in some way. Like the way I think and process is different the way. It may be similar in some ways, but you see the world very differently than I do, right? Even colors look differently than what I see, right? And so we're saying this is like the average, the law of averages when we're talking within these ages. Some kids develop really early. Some kids get into those executive function, and then we call them like old souls. They're just able to process really early. Other kids, it takes them a lot more time, a lot more work, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone's on that different playing field. We also have this really great thing called dendrites. You ever heard of dendrites? We have 100 billion of these in our brains. You have 100 billion dendrites, and these are another fancy term. Think of it like neurons and like these neuroreceptors. And so this is just a pathway from newborn to 4, just to kind of show you how rapid they develop and they create. And they create over time by the skills and by the experiences you encounter. So like your brain is constantly taking these skills and it's forming these things. So then your brain's talking to all parts of it and processing and doing different types of things based on what you're learning. Now, around 2 years old, it becomes chaotic. I say, well, that's a toddler, right? A toddler life is pretty chaotic if you think about it. As parents would say, you're just trying to keep your toddler from they're a danger to themselves, right? You're trying to keep them alive in a lot of ways. And so there's a lot of happening there, a lot of dendrites being formed because a toddler is learning so much. And their brain, and they're learning skills they don't really need to know. Like maybe they'll never need them in the future, but they're learning and they're doing all these different types of things. Like when my kids were little, they were doing different type of chores and skills, and I'm like, no, it's okay, you don't need to know that, but they wanted to, right? And those are like the dendrites are being formed and they have that. But then around 4, and really throughout our whole life, it kind of slows down, and the development, and it also gets more organized in our brain because we have executive functioning, we have emotional intelligence, we're able to put brakes on, and we'll talk about brakes in a moment. We do all these different types of things. It organizes our dendrites, but not only that, but our dendrites are naturally, they get pruned out. Remember, if you don't use it, you lose it, and so those dendrites will prune out the skills we no longer use. Well, the problem is when you're on a cell phone and rely really heavily on smart devices, your brain is not using those skills, and now we have brains that are really pruning out a lot more of those dendrites as time goes on. Instead of holding on to skills that they may need in the future, our young brains now in our culture are starting to just let go of a lot of things and really thinning it out, and we haven't seen that before. And this is just an outline of the brain, so you can kind of see a little bit more detail what I'm talking about. You have the executive functioning there in that frontal lobe, that's that gray matter we talk about, and then you have all the decision making, sensory processing. Visual information is also impacted by scrolling screens. Your eyes do not see beyond like that. It's like putting blinders on a horse, right? Like when you put your eyes on the screen, it's really hard to see. You also process the light waves and things like that can really impact not just your physical sight, but like your brain just gets lit on fire, just like this constant information in. But you also have the emotional side of your brain that's really impacted by these different things. So you have your sensory relay and your hormones, and all these things work together for you to have a high level of understanding of like consequences and actions and emotions. And then when you put the screen into that, this really gets jumbled up and it's hard to process what we're encountering because we have like this sort of thing that hits us in different ways and different hormones. This is just a thing on screen time. I thought it was interesting, and I think it kind of speaks to what this topic is. I found this study. This is from the Boston Pediatrics, the Boston Children's. I think it's Boston Children's Hospital, their pediatrics division, and they basically did a screen time study on this. And these are young kids. These are like 18-month-old kids, really, really young. And you think, well, why do they have cell phones and scrolling? But how many do you see like at the grocery store with those screens? I mean, I see it all the time when I'm sitting there at dinner, and there's the kid with the Cheerios and also the screen sitting in front of them at the restaurants and things like that. So they wanted to see like what does the brain look like when this is happening, and so they just look at based on hours a day, and this is just sort of how their brain is becoming more and more active, and you can see in the middle. You have like, especially on you have the frontal lobe activity, but you also have that sensory activity. There's a lot of emotions and a lot of things that this child's trying to process while they're looking at that screen. Their brain is on overdrive. And you may think, well, yeah, but Dr. Hunt, we limit our screen time. But if you give a child a scrolling device, that screen time can go really fast. If you think about when you wake up or in the morning, or maybe you're having your coffee, and you start just scrolling through the news, and then suddenly it's been 30 minutes, you're like, whoa, where did that 30 minutes go? I'm sure you've encountered that at least one time scrolling, or if you go into your phone and you get lost in the scroll, like, oh, why did I come in this device? What was I looking up? Right? We do things like that because our brains get just distracted, and that's what happens with kids, and before you know it, 4 hours have gone by, and their brain is so overloaded, and they have all these emotions and all these different types of things, and things can be quite chaotic really fast. So this is also part of the limbic system, talking about being chaotic. The limbic system is the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system. And so really, when the kids are young, they have a hard time putting the brakes on. They're emotional. They have a hard time saying, I've had enough, I feel satisfied, right? And we see this with these kids, like how often we have to tell them no. Like, no, you can't have more cake, or no, you can't do that, right? And we tell them these things because we know that those boundaries are good, healthy habits for them to have. But their brains tell them, no, just keep going for it, right? That feels good. I like the way that tastes. I want more. I want more. I want more. And they haven't developed that skill yet to say, I need to stop, right? They just haven't developed that skill. And so as parents, you are the brake. That's the most important thing. We don't develop the brakes until 25 years old. So you are the brakes for these kids. You are the ones that tell them no. There's a great parenting book called Be the Parent, Please. And that's the whole synopsis of the book could be saying how to tell your kids no. And it's okay to tell your kids no. And to be the parent. Sometimes kids are going to be really unhappy when you tell them no. And as the book kind of explains, is that sometimes unhappy children turn into really happy adults because they've learned how to put the brakes on. Because they know I can pull up the phone, I can scroll through for 10 minutes and say, oh, that's enough for today, I'm going to put it away. Because they've been taught over time through your scaffolding and your executive functioning work with them, their brains have been formed to understand, to put that limit in, right? How to turn off the screen and say, I've had enough today, right? I can move on. I need to put the brakes on. But until they get to that point, you are the brakes. You are the person telling them no, and you're giving them those boundaries. And one of the reasons why we give them those boundaries is dopamine and serotonin. You've ever heard of the term dopamine hit? Yeah? Well, there's a lot of dopamine hits. And dopamine hits is usually a pleasure feeling throughout the whole entire body. Dopamine is a pleasure feeling. And it comes in different ways. And there is good dopamine, right? When you're exercising, you get the endorphins running, and you get that short, but it's not satisfying, right? So dopamine is never satisfying. It hits you, you feel pleasure, but you want to feel it again, and sometimes you have to go further and faster in order to get that same feeling again. And dopamine hits have become digital in a lot of ways. The like button in Facebook was based on dopamine hits. Because the founders, and they even talk about this in their post interviews over the last decade or so, the founders said, we understood the human brain, and this is how much they think about your children's brain and being addicted to these things. They said that we understood the human brain, we understood people would get addicted to the likes because it gives you that dopamine hit, and we did it anyway. And even some of the founders have come back and said, there's one thing I would change, is get rid of those likes. And now Instagram and things, you can remove those likes. I recently had a post. I rarely tweet out, and if I tweet something out or X post something out, it's like a repost. I mean, I'm more or less a lurker in that world. It's like where I get my immediate news, and I find out, Catholic Twitter flavor of the day. What's the debate? What's the Pope saying? But there was something happening in Texas with A&M, and I was like, this got me riled up. So I reposted something, and I said something, and it got like 500 likes, like 560 likes. I've never gotten more than 50 on anything. And so as the day was going, I was getting those dopamine hits, and I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. And I found myself, and I had to call myself out because I kept checking. Like every half hour, I'm like, I wonder how many I got now. When I hit my first 100, I sent a screenshot to my husband, and I was like, look who's gone viral at 100. And then I ended, I think, like at 571. And then it ended. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what I could do to get more, right? And that's just a natural part of the human brain. And you can imagine our kids, that's what they're encountering, right? And they get that dopamine hit when they go in and they get those likes, and they're doing really silly things on TikTok or Twitter or whatever space that they're given. If you gave them space in those areas, that's what they're seeking out, and their brains aren't developed enough to executive functioning to understand that what you post has serious consequences, regardless of the likes. You could be canceled, you could lose your job, as we saw this last week with many people lost their jobs for posting really stupid things, right? You can do a lot of harm to yourself, but their brains are not thinking ahead like that. They're just thinking about that dopamine hit, that like button. Serotonin is really what we want to achieve. Serotonin is that long-term satisfaction that you get. It's through achievement. So it's like you build something. So let's say you're a woodworker, and you've been working on this family dining room set for a really long time, and you put a lot of sweat and blood and tears because things don't go right. Like it's a project, right? And you have projects in your life, and it's hard work to put this thing together. But then when you get done and you look at the dining room set, you're like, oh, I like this, and this is really great. And you feel like such great satisfaction seeing it in your home. And then when you see it, your core memory will actually remember how good it feels to put that work in. And that's serotonin. And serotonin isn't encountered really in the digital world because you get those dopamine hit. Serotonin is a long process. And usually we don't get that real true like satisfying feeling without putting a lot of work in. And the digital world, you don't put a lot of work in sometimes to get a very quick reaction. It really is. It's amazing. It's amazing what people are getting. And that quick buck and all those things that come into place. It's short, it's fleeting, and our kids are really addicted to it. So we're going to talk about the great rewiring. So we talked about how the brain reacts, and now we're going to look at the effects. So we know that they need the brakes. We know they need the executive functioning skills, the emotional skills. We know their dopamine's off the charts high when they're scrolling. But what actual physical things are we seeing in their lives? And it's pretty easy. So the first one is physical well-being. In the 80s, it was like you watch too much TV, the kids are going to be obese, right, because they're not outside playing. The kids are going to have bad eyesight, right, don't sit so close to the TV. All these different things, and it's true, right? The kids did have impacts. Study after study, you can go through about the impacts of physical well-being. You still see the same thing in devices, smart devices, but you also, one of the most troubling things that you see in smart devices, talking about breaks, is kids have very bad sleep habits. Really, really bad sleep habits. I have 2 night owls, and it's already hard enough to get them to wind down, and if you threw that smart device in, they would stay up all night. They probably would never sleep, to their own demise. They probably would never sleep because that blue light and that constant rapid information keeps their brain working, and it's really hard for them to turn it off. Researchers have said that even for adults, we should put down smart devices and screens 1.5 to 2 hours before we want to fall asleep. If we want really deep, deep REM sleep, we have to put that device down and allow our brains to really just relax. You can read, you can sit and talk to your spouse or do whatever, or needlework, whatever it is, but get off the screen because that brain is processing too much information and it takes it a while to shut down. My husband can put the screen down and go right to sleep. That to me amazes me. Like, it's just amazing to me that he could just turn his brain off like that. I can't. And I know that about myself. Like, I really had to put things away and maybe sit there for a long time for my brain to wind down, and that's for anything. So like even when I go home from teaching at a late night course, it takes me a really long time to come off the adrenaline or whatever. I'm thinking, I have all these thoughts going through my head. That's not even being on a screen. If you throw a screen into there, I mean, look at our kids. So many kids today in our American culture are falling asleep with a device in their hands. Mom and dad are tired, so they're like, I'm just going to let you watch TV. I'm going to let you watch TV on your scroll device. Just lay in bed with it, and you walk out of the room, and those kids are not sleeping, and they're not forming good habits of sleep. And their brain has become addicted to having to have that device on in order to fall asleep, because it's like it only has to need it in order for them to do it, and it's just a really unhealthy cycle, really, really unhealthy. So you end up with a lot of kids doing this with the blue light on at all hours of the night. And I've encountered this as a family. So in our family, we turn devices off at 10 p.m. for my oldest, my youngest. When they only get like real like free, like a lot more screen time on the weekends during the school. I'm like, you don't have time. You have homework. You have chores. You can watch a little TV after everything else is done, but they do not get to touch any type of phone devices, any scroll devices, except for the weekends. It just works for our family that way. But I can tell one time, before we shut down the internet, we turned it all off. We turned it all off. And the reason why we did is because one of my night owls, she woke up in the middle of the night, and I woke up, it's like a fever dream. I was like, what's that noise? Where's that light coming from? And I woke up and I walk out, there's 3 a.m. and she's like, hi mom. And she's sitting there just watching. And I'm thinking, I was like, what? And she's like, I've been awake all night. And my oldest will do it too. And I don't put the brakes, I'm the brakes. And I told them, I was like, this is so unhealthy. And so in order for them to develop those good sleep habits, we started turning everything off at night to make sure that my night owls, who wake up fully refreshed after an hour of sleep, they don't have a device to turn on to keep them constantly stirred up, that they can regulate themselves back to sleep. And that's a habit we're trying to do. The other is attention, memory, and learning. You may have heard this like in pop culture, is that as humans, we've gotten to where we can't really remember anything. We have terrible memory, and attention is even worse. Attention is terrible among Americans. There are some researchers who said we're down to like 9 to 12 seconds in our children being able to pay attention to anything. I'm more of a 2 to 3 minute person. That's just because of what I see actually in my classrooms. When I first started teaching 15 years ago with my high schoolers, I could put on a feature film at the end of the year. I used to show one film a year. At the end of the year, I would show a film, and my students would be just on the edge of their seats, really excited about it. They could watch the entire thing from start to finish. Now, this past year, and when I taught catechesis in my parish, I said, hey, here's a 3-minute video. We look at saints of the day, learning about confirmation saints. I'm like, hey, I found this really great video about St. George slaying the dragon. It's really quite crazy, wild thing. And I put it on, and they're like, how long is this? I'm like, it's 3 minutes. Oh my gosh, 3 minutes? Are you serious? 3 minutes? You're gonna make me sit through this? And I was like, it's 3 minutes, right? And it's like, just watch it, just watch it. And they naturally would try to take their cell phones out and start scrolling in that 3 minutes. They just really have lost a sense of concentration in our culture because of that constant scrolling. And I see myself do it too. Even I'm like, okay, when I'm watching a movie, it has to be really good for me not to pull out the phone, naturally start scrolling. You know, we just naturally do that. And if you think you have a hard time putting the phone away and not scrolling and really zoning in and giving full attention to, think about what it's like for the kids when their brains aren't fully developed and they don't have those breaks yet, right? And so that's something to really think about when you're thinking about doing these type of things and learning. And the learning is bad. It's gotten really, the teachers will say, the state of Texas, I didn't look it up here, but the state of Texas, we just passed the law, no cell phones in the school. Like some schools are really hardcore about it. They have lockers, you have to turn it in, there's bags, magnets, things like that. Other schools are kind of like, we just don't want to see it. It really depends person to person. But the teachers are already reporting across the state, their culture has dramatically changed in our schools. Kids are talking to each other, they're paying attention in class because they don't have anything else to distract them from. Their brains are actually reading things that they had not been processing before. So this is a picture of somebody. The red is a kid reading a book, like a physical book. That black dot is where the words, those are the actual words being processed in the senses. And the blue is somebody reading based on a screen. And you can see there's a lot more activity. Now, in this case, you want to see activity because the brain is processing what it's reading. The senses are taking in the words, the long-term memory, everything is taking in and absorbing these type of things. And so that's what you want to see. But the kid who's reading on a screen and scrolling through the words, it's not processing, it's not sticking. It's just going over them, right? And so when you have kids and smart devices, you may think, well, they're learning, they're doing this, they're doing that. But really, their brain's not absorbing anything nor developing any real skills. And the brain activity kind of supports that. We talked about this, about being really, really super stimuli. I saw this recently. I was just there to pick up some potluck stuff. I took my kids into an ice cream shop to take some stuff to a potluck. While we're sitting there waiting for our order, this kid in front of us was on an iPad, but just scrolling through, doing different things. The mom leaned down to eye level, took the iPad out of his hand and said, "What do you want from the menu?" And the kid had an all-out meltdown. It was the worst meltdown I've ever seen from a kid. Ever. And it was so loud, you couldn't think. Everyone was staring. My kids were staring. I was trying to talk to my kids to get them to stop staring because it was just awkward. The whole thing was awkward. A man walked in, and this is when I knew it had gotten really out of control. Another customer walked in. This guy walks in. He stands next to me, looks at me, and I look at him. And then he looked at me again. He's like, "You should," and he walked out. He's like, "I can't stay in here." Like he lasted 2 seconds in the whole event. The moment they got to their table and and this kid's getting ice cream. It's not like right? It's not like he's being tortured. The moment he sat back down and that device was placed back into his hands, he went back to just being completely normal. And so when we walked out of the store with our order, my kids looked at me at first and said, "Mom, you would never let us do that." And I was like, "Huh, that's funny because you've done it, right?" I'm like, "You totally have done that to me." But I was like, "No, it had." But I told us, like, first, it happens. It happens. I also understand that kid was so overly stimulated by that device, he just had no emotional regulation, right? I mean, this is like a 4 or 5-year-old. We see this in teenagers too. They're so stimulated by these devices and getting those dopamine hits, they lack the regulation and they get really, really high anxiety when you take that phone away from them. And they get really, really anxious really, really fast. And this has caused an over-reliance on tech. I work at the university, right? And so I get to see what all the parenting does, right? I see the kids that get in, and you can tell a big difference between kids who had boundaries with smart devices and those who did not. We have students who end up in the counselor center, and this is very much true, because we were just talking about this last week. We have students in our counseling center because they lose their smart device, and they can't function without it. They have an all-out emotional breakdown when they lose their smart device or it breaks, or maybe their parents cut them off from it. They end up needing counseling because they can't regulate their just separation from it. Their whole life is centered around that tech device. They can't find their way around town. They can't find their friends. They don't know because their brain has been, talk about memory. We no longer memorize phone numbers, so then they get super anxious because they don't even know how to call mom and dad. Right? And all of this anxiety gets really built up, and they end up in counseling because of it. And these are grown adults whose brains are almost fully developed that are having these emotional detachment issues from their devices. Then we also have attachment and connection. We're no longer talking to each other as a society. Like when you walk into rooms or you walk into the subway, I lived in New York City for a while. When you go into the subway, everybody pulls out their device and they're nose deep in it. And we're not looking at each other and really engaging and paying attention to what's happening. So we're not attaching to each other in a communal sense, a spiritual sense that we once had. You get a little bit more in the Midwest and South because we actually look at each other when we talk. But there's actually a generational study happening with Gen Z and the way they interact with adults, because we're starting to notice it's quite different. Like when you walk into, McDonald's, and you walk up to a Gen Zer, a very young person, they will just stare at you and wait for you to engage. They don't know how to just say, oh, hello, welcome to McDonald's. They don't know how to smile. They don't know how to make eye contact. Because their whole world has been on that screen and scrolling. They talk to their friends through it. They do all these different types of things. It drove me absolutely nuts. All summer long, my son, he would be scrolling on the phone, talking to his friends, right? We just had encountered, he just got his Bark phone this summer. So I would look at him and I said, why don't your friends get together and go out? He's like, that's weird. I'm like, what's weird about that? I'll take you, drop you off at the bowling alley. I'll drop you off here. Y'all can hang out. I'll take you to a baseball game, whatever. What do you guys want to do together? Mom, that's weird. We have our group chats, Mom. That's where we hang out. I'm like, now that's weird. That's just weird. How are you supposed to get a girlfriend? I'm like, you need a girlfriend, right, to keep you aligned. All these different types, they're just not. Their world is so different than getting together in that physical space is impacting them. Mood and self-perception is also, this is more elevated among young girls because they're harder on themselves when it comes to self-perception. Because of what they see and scroll through they see and interpret as being perfect, and I must strive to be perfect. They strive to be like the models. But young boys too, and a parent actually shared this example with me, and I was very grateful they did. They said they had to get their son off of the scrolling through sports videos of athletes his age, like the highlight reels. Because their son got really, really depressed because he didn't feel like he was going to be an all-star, rock star baseball player, but the kid down the street that was 12 years old was, because here's all the highlight reels and I will never be like that. They said we had to remove that from him so he could focus on just developing at his own pace. And I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. With all the highlight reels that we have now, access to our athletes, I could really see how young men are struggling with that too as they compare themselves back and forth. I also think this type of the mood that we have among young people is the influencer culture. The influencer culture is really, really big. Really big. And I see it, my kids don't have access to that type of world, but even my kids come home and they're influenced because the influenced kids on the playground are influencing them. And they're coming home and sharing things with me. I'm like, how do you know about Mr. Beast? And they're like, well, so-and-so talks about it. I'm like, what? How do you know these things? And it's because it's so ingrained and our kids are so influenced by them. And it really impacts mood and self-perception. The other thing is reward system over activation, over action. Our kids have become a culture from just everybody gets the trophies, like we have with the millennials, to getting trophies every 5 seconds. The badges, the dings, the dopamine hits, all the time. And it's what it's training their brain to do is always expect systems are great. They work. They work in classroom management. I was a teacher. I've done that. They work. They really do work. But when you do it all the time, they stop working, first of all, because then the kids are like, well, what's the big deal? Or they expect so much of you that they're never satisfied with the rewards, and they stop working or engaging altogether. And this has led to a big part of addiction in the brain. And you can see in the frontal lobe, that's the dopamine working in the different part of the brain, especially in that frontal and that sensory side. But kids become really addicted to these devices because of that dopamine and that reward system that's been created in those particular spaces. This is the hardest one to talk about, largely because of things that happened last week, is desensitization. First is pornography. When kids were little, they didn't encounter pornography unless you went and got the magazine. Now they just open up the device. Now about 80% of kids who self-report of encountering pornography. First, the age has been lowered from that mid to late teen years to the age of 8 to 10 years old. The average age that kids are encountering it. And the second most alarming thing, about 80% of those kids, they said, I wasn't looking for it. The algorithm put it in front of me. So when you give your kid a smart device, even if when you have like the best monitoring in there, those algorithms will seek them out, and they will encounter it in some shape or form, or it'll be in those simple scrollers. The other side of desensitization. Last week we had a tragedy, right? We had the person who was shot in public, and the video went viral. I was scrolling. I heard the news of what had happened. And I was scrolling through, trying to make sense of oh my gosh, what, right? And what are we dealing with, And the college campus, we have speakers like this all the time on both sides of the aisle that protesters come to, right, at different college campuses. It's very normal in college life. And so to have this happen, your brain's processing. So I was just scrolling through Twitter, just trying to trying to make sense of all these different types of things. And I saw the video. I wasn't looking for the video. My mind didn't even say, hey, I bet there's a video. Because I don't think that way. I come from a different digital culture, right? I didn't think oh yeah, people probably recorded it. I just happened upon it, threw the phone down, gasped. And then my next thought, I really hope my son doesn't see this. He's not on social media, but his friends are. And so my son comes home, and I'm not going to ask him if he did, because I don't want to bring it up and him go seek it out. So my son comes home, we're just kind of talking, and then he goes, hey, Mom, did you hear what happened to that guy? And my son he wasn't familiar with Charlie Kirk. He's not political in that way. Not yet. He's only 14. He hasn't gotten there yet. Now he knows a lot about him. And I was like, yeah, he seems to be a good guy. We're trying to talk about him as of the tragedy. And then he looked at me and he goes, I saw the video. I'm like, what do you mean you saw the video? On your phone? And then I was like, well, how did you see it on your phone? Because I have a very locked down type phone. And he's like, no, my friend showed it to me after football practice. So then it became a conversation. It's like, when your friend says, I'm going to show you this type of video, you should always say no, because you can't erase this from your brain. And the second conversation, if we talk about being desensitized, I'm like, you do know that was a human person and not a cartoon character. That wasn't a character in a storybook, a character in a movie. You saw a live killing of somebody. And you really need to think, and I just left it at that. And you could tell he was processing that. You could tell it kind of hit him in a different way. But now it's like, I can't, and I was so disappointed. I'm like, oh, and I just had this feeling before I got home that he had. I just did, because I know kids. I know them too well, and I know when things start circulating, right? He didn't seek it out. His friends was like, hey, look at this, right? And that's where we are. Let's get the smart devices out, because their brains are not prepared to see things like that. And they become desensitized. And my fear is that the next time he'll see it, his friends keep sharing these type of things with him, the next tragedy, the next this, and before long it is like watching characters on a film, and we lose a sense of human dignity. They become just characters, right? And that's not what we want our kids' brains to be formed in. So one of the things we hear from parents is, I can't enforce screen time, or I can't enforce these type of things. I can't get rid of the cell phones because it's everywhere. We've already crossed that threshold. And I'm here like, yes, you can. If you've already given your kid a smart device and they have a little more freedom, maybe then you're thinking that they should have at this point, or maybe you want to kind of scale it back, or whatever it is, and you're thinking, well, or maybe you're in an instance where your kid, it doesn't have a cell phone, and they're out roaming the neighborhood, and like, but all the other kids do. How am I supposed to battle that when all the other kids do? And you know, like my example of my son. And I'm here, there's things that we can do as a community to help our kids to make good decisions in our homes and prepare them to go into those spaces. And what I'm ending with, like telling you like about the 3 M's. This is really based on prioritizing your family and your values, delaying smartphones until high school, delaying social media until 16, and no phones used in schools. Now, I know your school may have rules about phones, but encourage that to follow the rules as parents. It's really, really important. Remind them, hey, keep that phone in the backpack. Remember, you can call me after school. Remember, if you need me, whatever it is, go to the office, they can get in contact with me, right? Teaching your kids on how to do that is really helpful and really healthy for the school environment. I would say social media, I told my kids no social media until you're out of my house. Because I taught high school, and I know what social media can become, even after 16. So delay to 16 and monitor when they do. When you feel like they need to be. Like my son, for example, we'll start with monitor. My son, for example, is on the football team, and the field goal kicker is being highly recruited from different college teams. And he's like, hey mom, he has his own Instagram account to put his reels up and to stay connected to recruiters, which is wild that we're in this space with high school kids, but it is. He has like a whole persona thing. And I'm like, okay, so maybe you have a kid like that needs Instagram because they're an athlete, right? It's part of the game. It really is. But you have to monitor it. Monitor who's talking to them. Monitor it that you log in with your kid. Say, I get 24/7 access to your smart device. My kid uses a smartphone. I mean, it's a smartphone, but we use the Bark phone. So the Bark phone basically is like, he cannot put an app, he cannot put a phone number, he can't do anything in that phone without my permission. He could do something, and then it says, sorry, seeking permission from a family. I get an email, and my husband gets an email. It's like, your son's trying to download this. And if I don't think he needs to do that, I just ignore and delete it. And usually he's got enough that I say no enough to a lot of different things. Like, he's just like, he doesn't even question me when I don't do it. Same thing with text messages. It's really, really sensitive. And so when his girlfriend dumped him over text message, right? Young love, you fall in fast, fall out fast, right? Happened over summer. And so it's very, very lovely girl. And it was very nice, easy dump. It really was. It was like, I'm really sorry, we're in different places, blah, blah, blah. It was really nicely done. But it got tagged as bullying. So I knew before he even got home that he had been dumped because it got tagged as bullying. That's how sensitive the Bark phone monitoring is, which was kind of nice because when he got home, I was fully prepared. Like, I was feeding him like his favorite meal, and I was like just kind of like giving him space. And he looked at me and he was like, "What do you know?" I know everything. And it's okay for your kids not to have privacy, right? At that age, their brains are not ready to be fully left alone, right? You are going to see, in the past, if a parent overheard you say something, they would say, hey, that's not appropriate. But now kids are no longer talking aloud, they're scrolling and texting. So you have to be in there to say, that's not appropriate, right? And that's perfectly fine. And as a parent, we are empowering you to do that type of work. The other is mentoring each other. So as a community, coming together and saying, I am on board with this. Because the first thing your kids will not, this is a totally natural kid thing to do, is say, but so-and-so's family, they have a smartphone. There used to be a kindergartner. We're in New York. We walk around the neighborhood, and you would go to the school, you walk up, they would come out. And you sit there, and every day this parent would take out her smartphone and hand it to the kindergartner. Just hand it, every day. And at first I thought maybe this was just a special occasion. No, every day. It was like the pacifier. Like, here's your smartphone, here it is, right when she walked out of the door. And then my kids are seeing this, and then my kids are asking me, by first grade, my oldest is like, so when am I getting my phone? It's like, never, are you gonna pay for it? And so but that's the thing. And so, but having a community and saying, hey, your best friend, their family, they follow these rules too. They have boundaries too. They may be a little more strict than me, or they may be looser than me, but we are in this together. And so as a community, to mentor each other. Have your families mentor. Talk to your kids and mentoring their friends about, hey, let's put this away and let's go outside, right? And we can do this together. We're communal people. Also, modeling. Modeling is really, really important as parents. It is okay to own a technology, but it's not okay to be owned by technology. And to model that for your kids. Put the smart devices down. Don't bring it to the dinner table, right? Don't bring it to the dinner table. The only time we have smart devices at the dinner table is if we're in such a fierce debate. We have to end the debate. And the most fierce debate we ever had was whether or not octopus can walk on land. And they can. There are some that can. My daughter said something like, octopus can't walk on land. I said, yeah, they do. And that became there was tears, and they're like, no, they can't. And I finally were like, pull out the phone, and we had to pull up videos. And I was right. So now anytime my kids doubt me, I say, do octopus walk on land? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, why doubt me, right? I'm right, I know. But we're not owned by it, right? We don't go into the dinner table, we put our smartphones away. I put mine on silent for long periods of time at night, right? We model this for our kids. When we go out to family functions, I tell my kids, you are to go and you are to ask, gossip. I was like, gossip with your great aunts, gossip with all your family members, because you're going to get back in the car and you're going to tell me all about the good things that are happening in our family. Because you're not talking to each other if you have a smart device. And I'm the same way. I don't take my phones into family functions. I put them in my purse, I put them in the car, whatever it is. I'm intentional not to get it out. I want my kids to learn how to be present with each other. Same thing at concerts. I may pull it out and take a picture, but I put it right back in my pocket. I don't keep things out to record and live time because I want my kids to learn to be fully present. I'm modeling that for them, and that's really important. I don't want them to be owned by it. Yes? Oh, yeah. Kids feel that naturally. Like, that's the natural growing up part thing. And as parents, it's like, well, how do you work through that? It's a season. I would say after raising kids, and I've gone through all the stages, and the teen years, I'm in the middle of it. My middle is really big about the fear of missing out, FOMO, right? Hear that term, FOMO, the fear of missing out. She really senses that. Like, she really senses that. She really wants, and for me, because I know she naturally has a deep inclination to like really just be emotionally like, I'm missing out on this, I can't be, why am I doing this? And she's always been like that. I know that I have to keep her off social media and be really staunch, like she could not be in there. Because so when they go in there and they and they think, well, they're missing out, they should have the phone, or they're missing out the group chats and things like that. I would say that never ends. And once they're in there, it like the feelings that they have to be in those spaces intensifies twofold and gets out of control for them. Does that make sense? It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like, well, why don't we just put them in those spaces because that was satisfied? Our brains are never satisfied once they get in there. It's this group chat today that I have to be in this one, then I have to do that, and then suddenly they're not in this group chat, and it becomes emotional attachment, and it goes on and on. So the child's brain is not prepared in order just to let go of those spaces. And so we have to let them go. If that makes sense? Yeah. And it's completely natural for them to feel that way. It's just that some of them is really, really intense. My son could care less. When he finally got his smart device, other than talking to a few friends, he forgets his phone at home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, could you please take your phone? I can't get in contact with you. Where are you after practice? Like, I left my phone at home. Because we delayed it so long and he doesn't create that habit. With my daughter, it's I'm already seeing complete opposite. And then I'm sure a lot of it's going to be like, it's so unfair. But she needs really strict boundaries because of that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. The last thing to end here, and I'm going to hand it back over to Kyle to talk to you a little bit about making a pledge, is the power of silence. I'm a really, really big believer in silence. Silence in the smart devices, silencing things around you so you can sit and hear God. And this particular quote, it says, if I were a physician and if I were allowed to prescribe just one remedy for all the ills of the modern world, I would prescribe silence. For even if the word of God were proclaimed in the modern world, how can one hear it with so much noise? Therefore, create silence. And that's from a philosopher. Cardinal Sarah has a book called The Power of Silence that also is the gist of it. It's like we can't hear God, we can't hear each other, we can't live in community in a deep spiritual way because we have these things on all the time, whether it's smart TV, whatever it is. It's really important. And so I really, really encourage you, if there's anything that you're inspired to do tonight, is to silence your cell phones, like really in the home. Like to go home and silence them. Find time to turn them off. Find time to, as a family, to turn them off. Teach your kids how to turn them off, to set those boundaries, to be those breaks. I want to empower you. If you cross the threshold, you said, I've already given them that smart device, this is your time to go home and reset those boundaries. To sit down with your kids and be honest. Hey, I've noticed this hasn't been a good thing for you. And so we're going to scale it back. You're going to get the phone when I'm not home, or you need to contact me after practice, but you're not going to have free range on it, right? And reclaim those boundaries, because your kid will be so much happier and healthier in the long run if you do so. I'm going to hand it over to Kyle, and he's going to talk to you for a minute, and then if you have any questions, I can stand around or we can ask them together. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunt. Give it up for Dr. Hunt, everybody. That's a tough act to follow. I mean, I know you've heard a lot tonight, so I'll be short. But I want to reiterate what Smart Families does. We're a nonprofit that was founded by two parents that found themselves in a situation a lot like you are, and like I'm in myself with my boys. You know, they had their kids asking for a smartphone at a really young age, and they decided to do something that nobody else was doing in their community, to delay till high school. And what they decided to do was just go to their school and see how many other parents would join them in this effort, which at that time, that's no small task. I know if I walked in and I didn't have Smart Families behind me and the neuroscience and Dr. Hunt beside me, then that would be a really hard thing to achieve. But when we look at the proof and we consider our faith and our family values, it's hard to deny that smartphones pose a great risk to our children and to childhood itself. So for a moment, just humor me and close your eyes and imagine your childhood, those memories that have literally stood the test of time, the things that I bet aren't posted on Facebook or Instagram. Those very memories are what is at risk. You know, I used to teach 5th grade, and I'd have parents come to me all the time and they'd say, what happened to the good old days when children played outside and when they got together and rode bikes and called each other on the phone and talked for hours? And my response, after a couple of years of not really having one, it became smartphones. That's what happened. And that's the thing that we didn't grow up with. And that's what is compromising so many of these great moments in life, this fellowship, the struggles as well. You know, a lot of kids aren't going outside and breaking a few bones or scraping their knees and, you know, finding themselves in good old-fashioned trouble and working their way through that. You know, God has this design for us, the good and the bad in our lives, and it's from that that we're shaped. And if we deprive them of that life in the real world, that would be such a shame. Because I know this community. I know these kids. They're my kids. And I care about them deeply. And so I'm that parent now in this school saying, please delay smartphones until high school. I've already signed this pledge. My kids, please don't make them be alone in this. That'll be a really hard battle for me to fight each time. But when enough of you join and enough of us band together in that way, we're going to start to look up and away from our own phones and think about, hey, I need to call so-and-so so we can get together. Hey, I need to call so-and-so because I can't pick up my kids after work. You know, we're going to depend on each other as a community as it should be, and we're going to thrive. And that would be such a beautiful thing to see happen here at this school. And so I urge you all to please, please sign this pledge. Please consider signing it. And if you want to know more, talk to me about it. There's alternatives to giving our kids this smartphone that has become this status symbol, this thing that is really the ultimate influencer, where even with the best parental controls we can come up with, if you can figure out how to even work them, I haven't been able to, then, you know, still the influencers and the tech developers and the app designers, their influence permeates all of that. And that's exactly the way they want it. Hundreds of billions of dollars are put into the development of these devices each and every year, specifically to capture our attention and our kids' attention. And it's a life that's spent scrolling. Please do not allow the world and all its wonder to pass us by or our children, and sign the pledge along with me. That's all I have for tonight. So if you have any questions, I will come and run to you with the microphone, and Dr. Hunt will answer anything you have. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Is there any appreciable difference between the type of activity that they do on the screen compared to the brain development? For example, our high school kids, it feels like 90% of their homework is done on a device now. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that neutral? How does that relate to their brain development?
Yeah, it's a very common question because of the devices we use in our schools today. And so it becomes almost like a dichotomy or a tension between families and schools because families are saying no to screen time and no to smartphones. And then they go to school and the school's like, here's a Chromebook, have fun. So yes and no. I mean, you're not going to process the information in the same way as having a physical book. And I could talk to my kids as an example more from anecdote, but there has been studies, like I said, there have been lots of brain activity studies to look at the brain and see how we're processing information through scrolling or screens, and it's not processed in the same way or absorbed in the same way than having a physical book in your hand and writing things down. And we've seen this for many, many years, right? And the screens have been around and smart devices have been around long enough that we're kind of seeing this. Overall impact is students have a hard time paying attention and really focusing in when they're on a lot of screens or scrolling. And we say smart is like the scrolling type devices apps where you can jump in and out of different things. But Chromebooks are a lot of ways like that because there's so many apps and stuff on the computers. I even had someone point out to me, she's like, yeah, and even our TVs, our smart TVs, you can scroll for hours and looking for something to watch. And there's never ending, right? It's a constant black hole in those. And then you can put apps on there and YouTube and all the same things. I mean, you're absolutely right. And our brains just are not processing it. It's too much information. My kids, anecdotally, my kids go to a tech-free school. They're in a classical education school. We didn't really seek that out at first. We were just looking for a really good school. My son needed to transition to a school. Our Catholic school didn't have enough boys. It had one boy in his class. Like, Mom, I really want to be in sports and do the things with school. And so this happened to be an option. I had a really great reputation in our community already. In Irving, Texas, they had a charter school called Great Hearts. We chose to be a founding family at the location we're at. And it just happened just aligned, and I've heard such great things about it. Let's like, okay, let's go. And then when we got into it, and I saw, and then I was like, oh, they don't use technology, and everything is handwritten. My kids do not write anything or type anything out in the computer until they're in high school. And my son now goes back to Catholic high school, but in their high school is K through 12 there, and they don't really touch screens or actually do work. They do their state testing on computers because it's required. That's the way they test. My kids hate it. They hate it, and I think it's detrimental. I think my kids do terrible in the test. One of the reasons because they're on screens. It's hard for them to concentrate because they don't do that during the workday. But they write everything by hand. They learn script. They learn all these basic things. When they sit down to read a story, they read the book in class and they annotate. And they start this in first grade with small books, and they work themselves up to the bigger books. And then they have Socratic seminar days. At the end of reading the entire book, the teacher turns everything off. They sit around in a circle and they start firing off questions, and the kids have to talk about the book and share their ideas and opinions and thoughts about what happened, character development, things like that. It's been phenomenal for my kids not to be on the screen during the day. Like, I could see such a big difference that they went from a tech school to a non-tech school, but that's not every kid's experience either. And I tell parents that worked really well for my kids' brains, but some kids also, because of emotional regulation and the way their brains work, being on the screen is part of their therapy. So I think you have to really go child by child when you get into those spaces and think about that. And schools have to discern that as well. And I know it's hard to differentiate learning, but studies, I mean, some students need that screen. Some of it makes them focus. But I say the average American kid putting a screen in their hand, that scrolling device, they just never concentrate. They just never concentrate because their brains don't know how to do it yet. It's already hard enough to get them to sit still for 5 seconds. I mean, you put a scrolling device, their brain, they can't handle it. They just can't regulate it.
What kind of resources does Smart Family offer when it comes to educating parents about the available controls on the device?
Sure. Kyle could probably talk about that. I know there's webinars. There's an upcoming webinar, and I know on the website I think there's phones on there, and there's also information about what they do that they don't do.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the simple answer is we draw a hard line at really the best answer here is to delay smartphones until high school. Because well, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that's something that we do have some resources available. We have a webinar that's coming up. I'm not sure when I don't even know if it's posted on the website yet, but it does cover a lot of what can you do in the home as parents to mitigate the risk of too much screen time. So that's a great question. We can include more information on that. I don't know how to specifically ask that, knowing that or how to specifically answer that, knowing that I gave my 5-year-old access to our iPad, and he was able to circumvent the parental controls so easily, and it was kind of amazing, like even just the screen time limits that are on there. And so it's a powerful thing that these devices are capable of. And our kids, as we try and manage the risk of them being on them and use those controls, what they end up doing more often than not, what the research shows, is that they get better at circumventing those controls. They change the time zone so that they can have one more hour, or they get a VPN so they can mask their location in their area so they can do other things and access other certain sites. So in the end, we, not just specifically about smartphones, but we want there to be far less usage of that. But yeah, we do have to accept the fact that this stuff is commonplace and it is going to be used in the home. But as that culture hopefully changes, we don't have to consider that quite as much.
Just to monitor. My husband works in cybersecurity, and he would say just don't have anything. Because everybody's watching you, everybody's listening to you, and he would just be like we are just probably, we have tech in the home, but it's minimal compared. Like you would think a tech guy would have all the things, and he's like, no, we're not having any of it, because it really, really is hard to really like filter out for teenagers. And I was, as a parent who's accompanying a teenager through that process of learning the proper way to use it, I would say the best thing you can do for monitoring is 24/7 access. Is to have that boundary set very early on, that your kids understand when you get a smartphone, when you are old enough, and we think you're mature enough to get that smartphone, that I get 24/7 access. And I tell my kids until you pay for it. And do it. And I know it sounds like, and I totally understand, because I worked in high school. I understand the boundaries, and they want privacy and things like that. But I've seen so many horror stories working with high schoolers too, when parents have said, I wish I just did it, because I thought they were mature enough, and I let it slip once, and this thing got out of control under my nose. And it's just because I just got lazy. And you can make it a weekly check. It's like, okay, every Sunday afternoon, I want your phone, and I get full on scrolling. And you can say every night, I'm going to get full on scrolling. I chose the Park phone because he can't delete messages. Yeah, he can't delete messages. He can't do any of that. Yeah, and so it's sensitive, and it's hard, but it's been good too, because I've been able to talk to him about some things that I otherwise wouldn't see. And I'm also it's also nice that sometimes his friends will say something, and he just replies no, which is him setting a boundary. Like, yeah, my mom's watching. Like, no, and I think that's kind of nice. I think that's kind of nice that he's actually kind of navigating, like, how do I have private conversations with my friends? As I pick up the phone and I call them, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's teaching him how to navigate those things, and it's been good and healthy for us. I know kids with different personalities are going to act and react differently to smart devices, and it's just something your family has to find what works for you, and trust, and also trust your parenting. Really trust your parenting. If you've done the work early, and you're done with them, and you're open and honest and talking with them, and that's what I find with teenagers. You just keep that line always open. So what's going on in your life? Tell me more about that, right? If you monitor things and you find something like, hey, don't accuse them. Just say, hey, I saw X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me more about that? Just tell me more. I just leave it at that, and they'll start talking, right? And they feel safe, and they can talk about it. And they know there's not going to be like this huge thrown at them consequence immediately. And many times I find that that's really helpful. Just saying, tell me more. Tell me more about that. I find that really helpful with my kids. And they do. They bleed. They bleed over. Yes. Yeah, sure.
So I don't know what everybody does, but we seem to be a bit of an anomaly. From the beginning, we've started to just put passwords on everything. It's a lot, you say they can break through things, but they probably can't guess your password, and if they do, you can change it. Don't forget that you get to turn off the internet. You can go in the Chromebook, and you can just forget the password that weekend, all weekend long, and they can't get in. There's so many things that you can do. If you have a little bit of tech know-how, we have a firewall where we're able to set up even like you can only access it until 10 o'clock. Or maybe you can't access it until like 8 p.m., till 10 p.m. You can make choices and just simply reduce their access to the device. It's your internet, it's your phone, it's your laptop. And even the type that you give them, hopefully the Chromebooks that come with the school are more locked down than the device that you hand them. So you do have control over some of these things. Reduce the amount of time they're on there. We have rules about where they can do it. A lot of times they get to sit and do their homework at the kitchen table where somebody can walk by and see what they're doing. They don't have it in their room. They don't, there's so many things that you can do. And believe me, your high school kids will still make friends. I promise. My kid has plenty of friends, and he still has access to, a laptop at school. He's still talking to his friends. He can still make social plans, but he doesn't have to have it in his hand at midnight. So you have choices. There are things you can do. Get creative. Talk to your partner. Do it.
When my son was, and this is for when he was younger, we started at the screen time. We started to include a little YouTube here and there, and we started noticing like we didn't like really his attitude with YouTube. All right, he would have these breakdowns every time we turned him off. It's like, okay, screen time's over today, and he was just had a really hard time letting YouTube go. So in the middle of the night, my husband deleted it from everything and put a hard lockdown on it. And the next morning he woke up, he's like, I'm gonna watch YouTube for my screen time. And we look out, I'm like, oh, look at there, YouTube went out of business. And it was years. It was like a good 3-4 years before he matured enough and got, in the know. And he was like, wait a minute, it didn't go out of business. And we're like, yeah, it didn't. But, you forgot about it very quickly, and we moved on, and we moved to different places. So it really is. And with our teenagers, I have one who's very missing out, and but they get by. They really do. I mean, and I told one person, and she asked me last week, because girls are just really, really social. My daughter's really good friend moved to Tennessee, and they just plan. Like, she has Kid Messenger on my phone, and she's like, hey, can I call Georgia? And I just like, here's the phone, call her. And she does it in a semi-public space, right? And then she does it, or she's like, can I send Georgia a message? And then she hands the phone back to me. So even though she's like, a sixth grader now, and she doesn't have a smartphone, she still has interaction with her friends in a healthy way, to where she's just not fully on. And eventually, I hope we mature to the level where she can't have a smartphone. She can have it for more than just a few seconds. But it can be done. It can be done. And I encourage you to think of what works in your family. There's tons of stuff you can do. I don't know, we'll take one more question and then we can wrap it up. Yes, go ahead. Out, and we think as Catholics, we think of the good of people. I think we naturally seek the good because we're created in the image and likeness of God. But we forget there's people out there that do things, really, really, really awful things to lure our kids in. and to manipulate them and to indoctrinate them or whatever what word you want to put into there, and they encounter this information at watching their favorites. It's something as innocent as watching highlight reels. Yeah, it really does happen. That's a great example. It really does happen. So keep it mindlessly scrolling. Keep it out of their hands as long as you can, and make good, healthy choices as parents. And it's hard. I mean, they're telling you, I don't know firsthand. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to tell your kids to, sometimes you will feel like you're missing out, but it's okay. It's okay. Because you're gonna feel like that your whole life, right? You're always gonna feel like you're missing out on something. I don't know. That feeling doesn't always leave you, right? It does. It's just life. Life. Stay living. All right, you guys have been great. I'll linger a little bit if you want to say or talk to me about anything. I'm very happy to meet with you. I thank you for being here and investing time in your kids' future and making good, smart, healthy decisions. All right, thank you.
Well, we think you made a good and healthy decision by coming tonight, and we promised all sorts of prizes. So I have Mr. Schuster here. He is going to be the official drawer. So if there's anybody you doesn't get your number, it's him that you can blame. But we are already going to start off with a winner, and that is the 4C class, because 4C, Mrs. Mole's class, had the most students here to participate. So they will be getting donuts. Yes, gotta love it, gotta love it. Everybody who is here, their kids get a Jeans Day pass, and there is one family that's gonna walk away with a $100 gift card to Red Robin, and that is, there we go, let's see. That is ticket number 713-184. You must be here to win. So 184 is the last three numbers. Oh. 184. Okay, you have to be here. So going once, going twice, roll it again, or draw again. Okay, so this one is 713-188. Woo! All right, here you go. Congratulations. Got you. I trust you completely. Yes, very much. Okay, so Perfect. Okay, but we have more. We have another drawing, and this is actually for our book fair. So this is for a family, and each child in your family will get $20 to go to our book fair. So if you're one child, $20. If you have 5 children, 5 times 20 is $100. And that number is 341707. Is it yours? Okay. It is. All right. We are great. You're a parent here too. Yay. Okay, and one more. And this one is actually, since Faye's kids won the $20 for the book fair, Faye's also graciously given up a half day of her time to give one of our teachers a half day off. So this is the winning ticket, and what this ticket does is it gives you the opportunity to choose which teacher you will award this to. So, no pressure, but this ticket is 341704. Woohoo! All right. Very good, very good. Excellent. There you go. Perfect. Very good. Okay, so I think that is all of our prizes, but we also had 128 students represented in the group that we have here. So when you think of the impact that we have and just this collective knowledge, I think knowledge is power, and the more that we can grow together, the more we can learn together, the more we can build a stronger community together is really what this is all about. So thank you so much for making this a priority to be here. We very much appreciate your time. Yes, did you have a question? Spirit shirts and jeans tomorrow, yes. So all of your kids are winners for that. So I think the spirit shirts and jeans tomorrow, because Thursday is picture day where they get to dress, and Friday is spirit shirt and jeans because of the pep assembly. So literally spirit shirts and jeans the rest of the week. So unfortunately that might mean some more laundry, but your kids will definitely be happy. So thank you again for being here, and we will be here afterwards if you have any questions. And again, a thank you to Smart Families for providing our speaker tonight and our prizes. So very grateful for you. Thank you very much.